Well, thanks, Kathy. As Kathy mentioned, I'm Steve Estes. I'm the County Extension Agent for Ag and Natural Resources here in Taylor County. And I want to welcome you to the Taylor County Extension Office and coming out to our Saturday seminar. The Saturday seminar that's put together by Master Gardeners. They do an outstanding job of putting these together and delivering education to the public. Some of you are Master Gardeners here in the room, and you may have heard me give this presentation before in the past. But those of you that are new, welcome. And as Kathy mentioned, today's really about, like the title says, making your beds. But your beds, you have to start with the soil first, right? And understanding the soil is the first key component or the building block on what you want to do or setting a goal. Well, let me back up. You want to set a goal, or you have a goal in mind of what you want to do and what you want to grow. Now let's start with the soil, figure out what you have, and then how do you get there? How do you be successful? Well, it all goes back to starting with the soil. And later you're going to hear about, as Kathy mentioned, the next speaker is going to talk about working with some bad soil, if you will, and trying to fix it and what she's been able to do. And then Mr. John Gibb is going to finish out today and talking about the actual amendments and doing that. But I'm starting out really just talking about the basics of soil, okay? So let's just learn about it itself. Now, this is a presentation that I've kind of adapted and put together for Jake Maurer. He's one of our soil specialists down at College Station. The guy is a guru with soil. He's been here before and given presentations, but I've taken his presentation, kind of modified it some. But what I want to do is put it into an easy, understandable way. I'm not going to get real scientific because with soil we can get very, very in depth. And there's a lot of science with soil. But I want to try to put it in terms where any of you can understand and not get very scientific, if that sounds okay with you guys. So first question is it dirt or is it soil? How many call it dirt? How many call it soil? And really the answer to that is dirt is just dirt. But soil contains more. It contains microbes, contains air, nutrients, everything together to grow life, to grow plants, something. So that's what the difference between soil and dirt.
Growing weeds.
What's that?
Growing weeds.
Growing weeds. That's a livable plant, so it supports it. And to be able to support that, you have your principal components of soil. You got to have air, water, a little bit of organic material, and minerals in it. And that all that put together makes soil. So think of soil as little tiny particles, like little tiny rocks, if you will. And they're all together, and when you have a little bit of water in there between those soil particles and some air, that all comes together and makes it to where, so this is kind of roots basically, can grow down in it. And then when we do get rain, when it's saturated, there's no air in there. When something's overwatered or gets too much rain, it has a hard time growing. Then we have what we call field capacity, which has has enough water that it can hold, that has the right amount of air and everything. And then we get into a permanent wilting point, which is what we see a lot of times in the summertime around here. We don't have very little water and a lot of air in our soil. That's really a dry soil. Okay? So there's different layers of the soil. We're up here, and then we have this organic matter on the top, and we have our topsoil, and that's really where all the magic happens, the roots and everything. Then below that, then you get into the other layers where this really doesn't support life down here. So we really want good topsoil. Your topsoil is your subsoil, but then down in here, and sometimes, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but sometimes, depending on where you live, this layer may be very thin, and you may get down into rock and whatnot down below it. So a lot of that to keep in mind, and that's something that Mr. Guy will cover here a little bit. So just a cross section. So this is kind of where your root zone is up here. And you got your topsoil, especially if you're growing grass or anything. Your roots are right in here, and you have your subsoil, and then you down here, and not really much grows down there. So why is there a different color in soils? You've driven around this, especially this area. If you go north, get up around Anson, for example, well, one, you go through Hawley, Maybe familiar with driving up 277, go through Holden, there's a sandy area called the Shinry area. There's a lot of shin oak grows there. You get around Anson, you'll see a bunch of cotton fields. The soil looks red. But if you go up around Stanford, especially east of Stanford, even and somewhat west of Stanford, like going towards Hamlin, you'll see a little darker soils in the fields. Especially if you go out towards Roscoe on I-20, you'll see some cotton fields out there. That's out of Sweetwater that has some blacker soil. And in other areas, you'll see this. You'll see some rolling hills that the soil just changes in colors. You'll see a light color and a dark color, and then this, and then the red, like I mentioned. But all that has to do with history and geology and how the soils were made over time. A lot of times, the darker soils, a lot of organic matter in them and whatnot, but that doesn't mean that this soil can't grow as good as this. It's just because its color is different. It's just a little bit different makeup and where it goes back to from many thousands and millions of years ago. So, variations in soil types. Taylor County, we're really we're right here. And you'll see we're part of the rolling plains that kind of stretches through here. Then we have part of the Edwards Plateau in here as well. If you live out south of town, you get in the hills, that's part of the Edwards Plateau. If you live right here around Abilene or north, or you'll see that you're part of the rolling plains. Our soils vary quite a bit within those. That also limits your productivity, your fertility, those types of things, and which I'll cover much more here in a little bit. But let's talk about the soil texture itself. Now, basically break soil down into three parts. Your sand, silt, and clay. Okay? Your sand is the biggest particles, or bigger particles. And your clay is the tiniest particles. How many of you have clay, or how many of you have in your lawn or your garden or whatever? Sometimes it can be as hard as this floor. And chances are you have clay. So what happens with clay is it's tiny, tiny particles, then it binds together. And then it can get, when there's really no air or water in between, there's nothing to separate those particles, it gets very compacted. And that's why it gets hard. Sand is really soft, right? Because it's got bigger particles. Think of it's like really actually tiny rocks, really just together, like little gravel, if you will. And it doesn't ever really pack together because the particles themselves they're too big to do that. Now silt is kind of in between sand and clay. But this just shows you kind of the size of these little particles I'm talking about. You know, sand, you go from very coarse, it's the coarsest sand. Think of beach sand, if you will. You know, they're 1 to 2 millimeters in size. And the clay is less than, I wasn't really good at math in school, but is there 2,000 or what is that? 2,000? Yeah, of a millimeter, less than that. So tiny, tiny. Now, any of your soil will fit within this triangle, okay? You got clay up here, and you got sand over here and silt over here, then there's a mixture. Most everything that we have anywhere is mostly a mixture somewhere in here. And I'm going to show you how that you can figure out what you have yourself. So, I have 2 jars here, and I'm going to pass these around and you can look at them, that 2 of our participants have pulled. You can take a jar, a mason jar like this, go dig you a little bit of soil, put it in here, fill it up with water. So put about half full of soil, fill the rest of the water, shake it really good. Just like you would a Dr. Pepper drop before you open it. Yeah. So shake it up really good and set it on a table, set it somewhere, and forget about it for a day or 2. And come back and look. Your soil will settle out. It'll separate. Everybody ever mix oil and water together? You know, it won't separate. Well, your soil will separate. Your sand will fall to the bottom, then your silt, then your clay. It'll make layers. These 2, you can see layers in them. I'm going to pass these around. They're not as defined as some do. Sometimes they'll come out, yours may come out like these jars up here, where it's very, very definite. But I'm going to pass these around, and you can see, but this will give you, it's a good, easy, cheap way. I just want to look at those and just pass them around. It's a good, easy, cheap way to figure out what your soil makeup is. I mean, it's not necessarily 100% detailed, just a question.
What do you want it to look like?
What do you want it to look like?
Yeah.
Well, you want a good mixture. It doesn't necessarily, there's really no perfect, I guess, soil, but you'd want a little bit of sand, a little bit of silt, a little bit of clay, kind of a good mix there to be ideal, but depending on what you're growing. So the question up here at the front is, what do I want my soil to look like? And there's really no perfect answer to that, although you really don't want one thing or the other. You don't want all sand, because it's hard to grow things in, and you don't want all clay, because you know it's going to feel like this floor right here, right?
Well, is most of it sandy loam around here?
A lot of it is sandy loam, with the exception of, I mentioned, like you go north of here, like around the Holly area, it's really a lot of sand. It does have a hard clay layer underneath it. You go out south of town, you get up here in the hills, you're going to get more. There's going to be a little bit of sand, I say mixed with some, maybe some silt, but it's very shallow topsoil. You have a lot of rock right underneath it. So there's a lot of variations, but ideally you want to kind of mix them. John, when he talks about amendments, kind of how to fix the soil, that's what he's going to finish up with you today. How to fix it, he's going to talk about what you can add in there. And ideally you can add things in to break up those soil particles if you've got too much clay. If you have too much sand, you might want to add something else to kind of pull it together. But there's really no perfect.
Is it, where I'm now in the Holly area, it's predominantly clay, very heavy clay.
Yep.
And is it good to add some sand into it to help break it up?
Yeah, if you're solid clay, then adding something in there. Some kind of organic matter, something to give, like I mentioned, those clay particles are so tiny that they stick together. The idea in your mind, you're wanting to add something to kind of break it up, to get air and water into those, in between those particles. Does that make sense?
Sand is a good.
Sand can help, yes. Other kinds of organic matter and things like that can help as well. Yep. So back to the soil test, or the soil jar test, something you can do at home. Get you a mason jar, dig you some soil, put it in there, shake it up,
How
some
far
water.
down do you need to dig to get your sample?
So ideally you want to be issued your topsoil, so about the top 6 inches.
6 inches?
Yeah. You want to see what your topsoil is, and that's where what supports the most growth. Now, you can dig down further if you want to do a test and see what it's like a little further down, but maybe you're like, yeah, you probably chances are you're in better place. Okay, so talking about the structure, and you know, is that making sense about getting air and water and nutrients in? We want to get a good mixture of all that together to support our plant growth. So ideally we want other things. Like in this hand here, it's a little more higher clay content, and see it's kind of sticking together some and whatnot. But this one you can tell there's a lot of room there for air and water and nutrients and whatnot. So the ideal soil. 50% solid, that means your actual particles, 25% air, 25% water. That would be ideal. Of course, you get into compaction. We were talking about compaction a second ago. You don't have much room there for air and water to get mixed in. So, what happens when you get too compacted? And you get an impedance, if you will, like this slide saying, your roots won't be able to grow. Could a root grow into this here? No. If you've got a hard compacted clay layer right underneath your topsoil, a root's going to hit it and go outwards. Also, if you compact on the top. Now, I mean, doesn't it seem like if you've driven across something in your lawn or whatnot, and you compact the top of the soil, and your grass didn't grow as good right there when the tire tracks weren't right. So you're compacting at the top. So if you have a soil that's very easily compacted, the something you really got to watch for. So like this seed right here, it germinated, tried to go up, hit that layer that was hard, and then went down here and then hit that layer too. What would happen to that seed? Probably wound up dying, right? A lot of times farmers, any of you in here farm? So we have a lot of cotton farmers around, right? Cotton is a broadleaf plant, so when it comes up, it has to push through the soil, and it has two little, the first leaves are they're called cotyledons. There's two of them. But it has to push through the crust of the soil after it germinates. Well, sometimes in these heavier clay fields, they plant the cotton, the seeds lay in there, and they get a rain right after that. And that rain kind of makes a crust on the top. Are you familiar with seeing that, like in your garden or whatnot? And then the farmer pretty much has to go in there and break that crust up, or otherwise all of his seeds are going to do this. And he's going to lose his crop. So they go in and they break the crust on the top to get that seed to push through. So just an idea of compaction and roots. This one has low compaction in it. You can see how the roots, they grew way down here. This one has a little bit medium compaction. That's about as deep as the roots went. And this one has highly compacted soil. And the roots didn't get much further than right here. So they can't push down. Well, which plant's going to do better? Well, on the left, right? So when you're working with your soil in your garden or whatever, keep that in mind. You want good, deeper roots system for a few different reasons. One, it can hold the water better. We're getting these hot, dry summers, and it has more soil moisture available to it. This one up here, whether it be your grass in your lawn or whatnot, or even plants, a tomato plant in a garden. If it has a shallow root zone, you're going to have to water quite a bit because that water is either going to evaporate, it's going to finally leach down into here, but those roots doesn't have much to drink out of, right? Here's a good example of a cotton plant. Cotton has a taproot. This taproot hit a hard clay layer right underneath. This is probably about where the soil surface was. It went down, bam, hit it, and those roots just went out. Now, speaking of that, there's another word to remember is permeability. Okay, permeability means the soil's ability to take on water and yet for it to soak down into it. So you get a heavy rain, and how many times have you seen this? The water just sits there at the top. The soil is soaked, but it's not very permeable. Heavier clay soils aren't as permeable as like sand. And you see situations like this. It rained on this field, and the water stood there. And the farmer, I don't know why he decided to drive through there with a sprayer, but he did. And he got stuck trying to spray his field. And here's another one of these guys. I don't know what they were thinking, but they just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So, I don't know who was first, maybe the sprayer, and then this guy decided he's going to pull him out, and he gets stuck, and he's going to pull him out. Now they've got what looks like an excavator or something over there. But the permeability of this soil here, its ability to hold water kind of close to the top was good, but the water was not very well drained. A lot of times when you're picking plants, you see that they're in like descriptions, it'll say like plant in well-drained soils. That wouldn't be well-drained. So that's where we get back to the texture. You have sandy soil, a loam, and a clayey soil. This is just an old picture that shows water that was put in the top of this at the same time. And then for the exact same amount of time, the water got down to here in the sand, and the loam that we got right here in the clay soil, in that same amount of time that it took over here, the water to get here in the sand, it only got that far. So water does not move very fast in a clayey soil. Another example of that is in a sandy soil or a 24-hour period, you see the water went straight down. Now, a clay soil, it took it 48 hours, almost double the amount of time to make it down here. But one thing I want you to note, though, is it did spread out. Okay? If you have a high sand content, Any of you live up in the sandy area, like north of here? Yeah, I know, and that's, you know, over Callahan County. They have a lot of sand up there too. I live over where it's very sandy as well, and water just goes straight down. And you know, we talk a lot bad about clay, about how it gets compacted and how it won't hold. You know, as far as the water, it dries out. The sand is just as bad, really, in some cases, because when it rains or you water, that water is going to go down quickly. It's going to go straight down. And what your plants can take up initially, great, but after that, it's going to dry out really quickly because the water loses. The clay will hold water better, and this goes back to kind of your question earlier about what's the best makeup of soil. You want something to hold water, but you also want something to let water go down too. So that's where you get back to that mixture. Here's a microscopic pictures of what sand and clay particles. You heard me talking about these little tiny microscopic rocks? Sand is just like a big little, think of a big rock, you know, together. Clay is a tiny, tiny particle, but see all these little shards and points, and that's how it gets stuck together, and they get so compacted, because that's the way they look. Sand is more of a, doesn't have those straight off pieces of, you know, that can hold and stick together. Plus it's bigger. So, back to water holding capacity. You know, your sand, very high, it's very permeable. Obviously water goes into it, but it doesn't hold water very well. Loam, you're kind of medium silt. It's a low permeability, but has a high water retention, and clay is very low and has a high water retention. They will hold water, hold moisture a lot longer, but it's hard to get water to go into it when it's very compacted. Here's a good example of just a root system of a grain sorghum plant. This was in more of a clay compacted soil, and this is more of a sandy loam. See how this root structure is so much better than that one? So we tell you all this to start thinking about your soil and the makeup of it. And you don't want it to get too compacted, you don't want it too sandy and too loose. You want to make room for that air and water mixture within the soil so that your roots can look like this rather than that. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about pH. Everybody's heard about pH. What is it? Where are we here? We're right around neutral, just a little bit above 7 in most cases, right here around Abilene. 7, 7.5. With Master Gardener new intern class going around now where they all took samples, and I was actually surprised a couple of weeks ago to see some of their results. There were a couple that was at 8 or higher. I hadn't necessarily seen 8 or over right here in the Abilene area just yet, but we do. So we can kind of get up into this area here. But most of you, your soil is probably going to be right here at 7 or about 7.5 for the most part. I have seen some lower ones. And in the sand, I've taken soil sample. I'm sure where you live in Callahan County, it's the same as we're kind of similar where I live. I've taken soil samples, and my sand is lower. It's more like 6.5. So very possible yours is too. For the most part, this is kind of where you're at, which is a good thing. Now, if you drive Interstate 20 and you leave Abilene and you drive east, then your metroplex. The further you go east, even to Dallas and even further east and past that, the lower the pH is going to get. If you drive west, like heading out towards Sweetwater and on the Midland, Odessa, the higher it's going to get. It's kind of weird how just our geography and our soils are here, but east to west, it's going to kind of range on this pH scale. Back east, a lot of the farmers and things have to deal with an acidic soil, and they have to apply extra things to try to neutralize it. You go out west, they're in a similar situation, they're trying to bring it down. Now, you're going to hear later about how to possibly correct it. I will tell you, there's really no silver bullet. You can't just go out there and just put something down and just, it changes your pH real quickly, and now your pH is good and all is well. You can change pH, and John will tell you this here in a little while in his presentation. You can change it. It takes some time, but it'll always revert back to. You have to stay on top of it. So, plant nutrients. Everybody's heard of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all those things. The pH has a lot to do with how your plant utilizes these nutrients, okay? So, let's say we're here at 7.5. Let's start at the top. We're very slightly alkaline. Nitrogen, that utilizes nitrogen very well. Phosphorus, we're kind of on the top side of the green, getting into the yellow here. I will talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Potassium, we're really good. Sulfur, calcium, you see, we're kind of starting to get a little yellow. Magnesium, we're good. And all these micronutrients, we're a little above. Now, why is that? Well, one reason is phosphorus, sometimes in the higher the alkaline soil, phosphorus will bind up in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. It kind of stays there. And the higher the soil pH really compounds that phosphorus binding. When phosphorus binds there, it changes into a little bit different form, then the plant can't use it. It kind of blocks the plant from using it. Well, when it does that, it also blocks the plant from being able to take up these micronutrients too. So what we do see a lot around here is we see a phosphorus level get high, and then we see a lot of iron deficiencies in our plants. Now, I ain't going to get into that a little further, but a little bit. We're going to get into fertilization and stuff here in a little bit, but that is a big component. Phosphorus, just remember this, phosphorus levels play a critical role in our plant development and growth here. Nitrogen, for example, the nitrogen doesn't bind up in the top of the soil. Nitrogen it'll either be used up or it can move throughout the soil. If you have a sandy soil, you get a lot of rain or water on it, it's going to take that nitrogen down. So the roots can use it, but then past that, if they don't get it, it's going to leach down throughout the soil. So you may have been asking, and of course this kind of gets to what you want to see, what can I grow here? So one thing, I mean, that's the main reason you're here, right? Well, I want to know what I can grow. So optimal pH range, so keep in mind, go back to pH. pH is very important. Here's some things that the ranges for optimal for vegetable crops. So if you're growing in your garden, your asparagus, beets, and cabbage, 6 to 8, we're great right here. If you get into like sweet corn and pumpkins and tomatoes, 5.5 to about 7.5, we're right in here. We can grow this. I mean, I'm sure most of you have grown tomatoes and probably sweet corn, and a few of you may have grown pumpkins before. I don't know. But if you ever thought about growing blueberries, you might want to forget that idea. Unless you do a raised bed. That's something John will talk about here a little bit, how you can. Because in a raised bed, you're actually controlling the soils. But blueberries really need a very acidic soil, and we just don't have that here, okay? So blueberries are out. So scratch it off your list. You came this morning and said, I want to learn how to grow blueberries. Not going to happen. Now strawberries, this shows, somewhat acidic in that area, but I can tell you that strawberries have been grown successfully here. Our master gardeners have grown them out here in our demo beds in front of the office. We've been to Denton Valley Farms. They've grown strawberries out there. So strawberries are doable here too. So pretty much everything but blueberries. Now, I talked about the water and our pH, and we get all that to kind of figure out what we have and kind of get that right. Now it comes down to the law of the minimum, right? This Justus von Liebig, he had basically came up with the idea that growth is controlled not by the amount of nutrients that you have, but the most limiting factor, or the most limiting single nutrient. So, what that means is, if you took a barrel like this here, and your slats were at different heights, and each slat represented something. It doesn't necessarily have to be these same things, but and you start filling full of water, whatever the lowest slat is, your water's gonna start coming out. You're never gonna get above that height, right? Or that full in your barrel. If you had a hole in your barrel, at some point, you're never gonna get above that hole. Well, that hole represents whatever your single most limiting nutrient is. A lot of times out here, that could be water. We're just lacking water. We're lacking rainfall. But it also could be nitrogen. If your plants or your lawn or whatever is lacking nitrogen in the soil, that's going to be the single most limiting nutrient. Or it could be iron. It could be a lot of different things. But whatever the lacking thing is, that's the best it's going to do, if all that makes sense. And it's like money could be the most limiting. Sometimes you may have grand plans, you want to do something, and I want to do all this, but money may be the most limiting thing. I just don't have the money to do what I really love to do. If I could just have the money, I could grow this and that, whatnot. So, yes, the most limiting factor is whatever the least amount of nutrient or input is. So, while we're on nutrients, the three main ones, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So if you get the fertilizer bag, you notice it'll have three numbers on it. And that's NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's your main nutrients. How many of you ever been in this situation? Probably where you lived here. You look at your neighbor's lawn. Your neighbor's lawn looks great, and mine doesn't look so good. You ever been in that situation? See that a lot. Grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, right?
Right.
But in this case, what's going on here, it may be a limited nutrient, where the neighbor has his or hers more balanced out. So, let's talk about nutrients. Nitrogen. I mentioned that it moves the fastest through the soil, but here's what it does. If you put too much on it, of course you reduce your root growth, but nitrogen promotes growth, like plant growth, like going up, okay? This tomato plant, for example, had a lot of nitrogen on it. It jumped up there, but do you see many blooms or tomatoes on it? So you add nitrogen to something, it's going to make that plant want to just grow, put new growth on. What's not going to do is make that plant say, oh, I need to put more fruit on. That's the job of other nutrients. But it's going to use a lot of water. It's going to reduce its hardiness, if you will. As I mentioned, reduce vegetable yield because it's not wanting to put fruit on. It's wanting to grow. Well, the faster it's growing up here, it's putting more energy above ground. It's not putting a whole lot of energy in its roots growing either. So I say that, I don't want you to take it the wrong direction. Nitrogen is great. Nitrogen will, a lot of times that's really all we need. Most soil sample I see come back here, nitrogen is the lowest thing on there. It's mainly because it's the easiest used for the plant. It also moves the quickest to the soil. So nitrogen is usually our limiting factor. So it's really good to utilize nitrogen. A lot of times I recommend just putting down just nitrogen alone. However, if you put too much, don't get carried away. Thinking, man, that really greened my lawn over. That really greened my garden up. I'm going to add more. I'm going to keep adding more. This is what you'd wind up with if you put get too much, right?
First, just putting in a plant to make sure you've got a good growth up on top. Would it be emphasizing nitrogen at the beginning and then slacking off later?
Yeah, because nitrogen really, the question is up front is, hey, I'm just getting started with my plant growth. Should I give it nitrogen initially to get it going? And the answer is yes, you can kind of get it going and it needs nitrogen to make it grow. But then you're also at some point, it's going to need other nutrients to enhance root growth and more stability. Think of nitrogen as kind of like us with, I don't know, carbohydrates. If we were gonna go run a race tomorrow, we kind of want to eat some carbs tonight, right? We might eat some spaghetti or something to get that energy. It's a quick energy. But after that, what does it do? Yeah, we kind of crash, or sugar, I guess we get sugar high. But it's really good for quick energy. Phosphorus, okay? So phosphorus is, as I mentioned earlier, it's very immobile. So when you put phosphorus down, it's going to stay in that soil. It's not going to move like a nitrogen. It's not going to leach or anything down with rainfall. It's going to stay there in the soil. The plant's going to use it up, or it's going to sit there, okay? Now, it's very, very important for early growth, so you need some phosphorus in there too, and root formation. So this phosphorus kind of promotes the root growth. It promotes the seed, vegetable, and floral production. So whether you're growing flowers or you're growing vegetables, whatever, they need phosphorus for that fruit. A flower is basically the fruit of the plant. So it needs phosphorus. Now, phosphorus, keep in mind, phosphorus doesn't move in the soil, right? It's going to stay there. If you have an higher alkaline soil, which we do, we have, say over above 7. That also affects the way the nitrogen, the phosphorus, it basically makes it stay there even longer, I guess if you will. And once phosphorus builds up to high levels, then it blocks other micronutrients. Okay? So we start seeing a lot of iron deficiencies and manganese deficiencies and things like that, mainly because they're phosphorus. So here's what I see a lot of times here, especially in town. If you've been fertilizing your yard, let's say you fertilize your yard on a routine schedule, which is not out of the unheard of. Matter of fact, a good rule of thumb is fertilize your lawn every 6 weeks or so. Follow the major holidays. Put an application down to Easter, and then maybe again on Memorial Day, 4th of July, and then Labor Day. Okay? However, if you're putting down just a general fertilizer that has nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and you're doing that over and over, your nitrogen's getting used up, your phosphorus levels aren't getting used up as fast, and they'll build up in the soil. And the next thing you know, you have too much phosphorus. And then your lawn looks like the person in the picture, and you're wondering why. But your neighbor's looks really good. So you take a soil sample and it comes back, you've got a really high phosphorus level. And the soil lab down at Texas A&M sometimes will tell you, they'll put a little note at the bottom, telling you what they think you should do. And a lot of times I'll see them come back, they'll say, do not apply any phosphorus for 5 years. 5 years? That's a long time. But that's how long it takes phosphorus, to really finally get used up. So be careful when you're putting out fertilizer multiple times a year and what you're putting out phosphorus-wise. The best would be to take a soil sample and see where your levels are. Sometimes you can get a soil sample and get it back and you learn all I need is nitrogen. I'm good with phosphorus and potassium. I just need nitrogen. And you can easily go buy a bag of fertilizer that's just nitrogen. So sometimes you get the macronutrients. You see some plants that look like this. They have the dark green veins. This is a phosphorus deficiency in a grain sorghum crop where there was phosphorus applied here, but there was a phosphorus deficiency here. Phosphorus, remember, it helps promote like seed growth or your flowering and fruiting. This grain sorghum here, it's growing. It's the same height as this plant here, but these plants have all shot up the seed head. They had more phosphorus to promote that. Too much phosphorus, you get like zinc deficiencies. You can see some symptoms like that. Then let's jump to potassium real quick. It's the same way. It doesn't leach or volatilize. It doesn't have it's not as big a deal necessarily as the phosphorus is though for us. What it does though is it helps the plant use its water more efficiently. So potassium is really good in that sense. increases disease resistance, and improves cold hardness. Kind of like we always said, you know, we drink milk and for strong bones, you know, the potassium, which actually those two kind of go hand in hand because milk does have a lot of good potassium in it for us. So plants need potassium as well to help with that. So potassium has deficiency, you kind of see what it looks like. There's also your secondary nutrients like calcium, magnesium, sulfur. This is what they help do within the plant. That are micronutrients, which sometimes, you know, usually don't have to worry about them because we don't really need them in small amounts, but in some cases we do. In the instance that you have too much phosphorus, right, and your plant, maybe it's your lawn, your grass, maybe it's some of your garden plants, maybe it's your flower plants or whatever. And remember I mentioned the phosphorus kind of blocks the plant from taking up other nutrients like iron being the main one, and you have an iron deficiency. So you're looking at these plants or your lawn, this is looks like an iron deficiency. But the problem is phosphorus is too high. If you go and put iron down, it's still not going to do any good because that phosphorus is blocking the roots from taking up the iron. So how do you do it? How do you get around it? Well, there are ways that you can do a foliar feed or a foliar application, which means you're spraying a liquid, like say liquid iron, if you will, and the plant's taking into the leaves. So you're bypassing the roots route of taking the uptake, and you're just putting it on the leaves. So the leaves can take it in. So if you get in a bind and you have an iron deficiency and it's due to too much phosphorus, you can use a foliar iron application, and it will almost immediately help your plant.
I have a question.
Yes?
So, if your phosphorus is high, it's not absorbing, it could make it where it doesn't absorb the iron. But in your soil sample, if you do have iron, would that only be the case if your iron levels were okay in your test? Will it show okay in your test?
It can, yeah. So the iron can be there. It's just the phosphorus is blocking the plant from being able to utilize
So if
the
your
iron.
iron is good and your phosphorus is high, it's probably gonna block it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. The question is that if I did a soil test and I have iron, and my soil test shows I have good iron in my soil, but also my phosphorus is high, it's a good chance that it's the phosphorus that's causing, but my plant's still showing an iron deficiency symptoms. It's because of the phosphorus. And the iron's there, the iron's just not in available form that it can use because of the phosphorus is blocking it.
Is there a way of literally cutting down the phosphorus in the soil?
Time. The question is, how can I cut down phosphorus in the soil? And the answer to that is time. I mentioned earlier that like some soil samples from the soil lab will come back and say don't apply any for 5 years. Live the time. Over time, the phosphorus level will go down, but it's very slow. That's really about all you can do. Is,
Flowering plants too.
yeah, you know, and you get the plants that can, when they're able to utilize that phosphorus, they'll use it up. And John mentioned flowering plants. Well, phosphorus, it helps with fruiting and flowering and all that, the nature of the plant growth. It's using up phosphorus when it's doing that. So give it time and let that use it up, but don't apply any more phosphorus. So here's kind of what iron chlorosis looks like in turf grass. This was down at Texas A&M in the turf research department. But you see some yellowing. Back to, I mean, I know this isn't in a great picture. A lot of times you'll see streaking down the leaves. And this is what plants that are able to good iron, then very limited iron there. That's what it's going to look like. You know, this could be your yard, and that could be your neighbor's yard right there, and that could be all the difference. And it may be a phosphorus issue. You get like manganese, they call it intravenous chlorosis. Now let's talk a little bit about how plants uptake the nutrients. We have different root structures. Different plants have different root structures. I mentioned earlier, like a cotton plant has a taproot. A lot of other plants have a taproot. This is what a taproot looks like. It goes really fairly deep in the soil. It has little feeder roots that jump off of it. a fibrous root system. You know, it just goes under the soil, then it kind of branches out. Some plants have little, you know, they grow like stolons. Bermuda grass, for example, you know, it runs along and spreads, and it has little stolons, and then it shoots little roots down. You have other things that have bulbs. There's corms. So just understanding, you know, your root, what type of roots your plants have, goes a long way back with the soil and how you want the soil structure to look to support the best growth possible. So, back to fertilization. There's not a standard fertilizer product out there. It's all based on what you have. And what you have, you do, the best thing would be to make a soil test, see what you have, and if you need something, try to match up the best you can at the store with what you put down. Highly discourage you from just going to the store and just buying those fertilizers that say just a general fertilizer for, even if they say it's for the Abilene area. Well, in some cases, it, you know, could be in generality, but just like we're all different, all your properties are different too. Your soils are different and have different needs. Keep that in mind. So, using those properly, we'll go through fertilizers real quick as I wrap up. So you got the simple fertilizers. I mentioned earlier you can buy fertilizers with just nitrogen, or just phosphorus, or just, you know, potassium. Then there's multi-nutrient. That's mainly what we're buying in PK. There's maybe it's a, you see the 3 numbers on the bag. That's the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are multi-nutrient. So like a 15, 5, 10. Basically, it's got a 15 parts of nitrogen in it, 5 and then phosphorus, and then 10 of potassium. So, like this 15, 5, 10, the ratio would be 3 parts nitrogen and 1 part phosphorus to 2 parts potassium. Does that make sense? So you can see it on the label itself, and it gives you kind of a breakdown of everything. So, how do you take a soil sample? And I think Kathy mentioned earlier we're going to do some door prizes. You got some tickets. We're going to give a couple of you. I think 2. Where's Kathy at?
Yeah, it's 2.
I think there were 2 that the Master Gardeners are going to pay for. You get 2 free soil samples. So winners of those, you get 2 free. But we also have soil sample bags in there for you to pick up as well. So how that works is you basically take your soil sample and you mail it off to the soil lab that it takes it in. They'll run the analysis and they'll send you the report back. They're, I believe, $12 per sample that you want to send down there, which is fairly economical to do. Now, I'm going to tell you how to take your sample. Depending on where you want to send it. Maybe it's a lawn, maybe it's a garden, maybe there's issues around where I have some trees. You want to go out and take a bunch of subsamples in that area, okay? So that's your front lawn. And I want to, my grass, I just have a hard trouble with the grass growing here. You can go around and take several subsamples. I usually tell people to get a bucket, get a 5-gallon bucket, go around, take several subsamples, put them in that bucket, just randomly throughout the area you want to sample. Once you get it in your bucket and you went across your area with several subsamples, mix it really, really good, and then pull out the soil and put it in your soil bag that goes to the lab. And that will be representative of the area. Okay? So the reason, say, do several subsamples is if you were to go out into one spot, take that sample, send it to the lab. There may be something right there that's not relatable to the rest of the area. And it may throw your test off. Right? How many have pets? Have dogs? Or even maybe even cats or whatever. You may have taken that spot right there where your dog just peed this morning. Now, is that going to show a good accurate test? No. So, there's different ways you can take this in.
So how big of an area do you want to take your samples from? I mean,
That's a very good question. The question is how big of an area? And that can vary. It depends on how big of an area you feel is similar. If the soil is the same, let's say we have a lawn the size of this room, okay? And it's pretty much the same soil-wise across it, and we want to send a sample, we can send a sample, one sample for this room. I would just take multiple sub-samples around. But let's say back in the back where they sit, there's a little more clay, and on this side there's a little sandier. It varies. Then I probably want to take two samples. I don't want to take a sample over there and take a sample over here.
But those you mix, or no mix?
No. If I'm doing, when I say samples, the sample, I'm talking in terms of the sample I send to the lab. So I'm going to do two separate processes. So there's sub-samples, so where I'm putting in my bucket, then I pull one sample out of that. So it depends on variation. Sometimes people, they have a front yard and a backyard, but they feel like the front yard and the backyard are a little bit different makeups, right? So best advice there would be do a sample set from the front and do a sample from the back. But if it's the same, you can do one. A lot of farmers, they have big fields, like maybe a 100-acre field, and if it's kind of the same across it, they may just do one or two samples. Yeah. So, pulling your samples, you really want to do about the top 6 inches of soil. You really don't want to go further than that. I mean, you can if you want to, but that's mainly your root zone. That's what you're wanting to know, is what kind of nutrients do you have where your main roots are, right? So just dig about 6 inches down. Try to kind of discard any thatch or any grass or organic material there on the top where it's good, just pure soil, and put it in your bucket. You can do this a couple different ways. You can use a shovel, you can use a spade. They also make these what we call soil probes. This is how they look like. This guy here, he's just spraying a little Pam cooking oil or non-stick cooking oil on that, so the soil doesn't really stick to it. And you stick it right down 6 inches, pull it back up, and it pulls a little core out. But you don't necessarily have to have one of those per se. You can use a shovel or a spade to do this. So he pulls it out, and it pulls a little core out, and then he puts it in the bucket, and this is part of it. So this is like putting it in. We have bags. This is an old picture where they used to do little boxes. Really, it's about a pint of soil that you need to send in. And of course, it's showing different things. I just mentioned that top 6 inches. Now, if you want to see what's deeper in the soil profile, you more certainly can. Sometimes we found one time we were working on some soil samples. I was working with actually Dr. Bauer that put this presentation together in some cotton farms where we sampled the top 6 inches, and then we sampled down 12 to 18 inches, then we sampled down 3 feet. What we found was down at 3 feet, there was a lot higher level of nitrogen. Well, remember that nitrogen kind of leaches through. So over time, the farmer put fertilizer in his field, so a lot of that nitrogen had went on down, and it was staying down there. Good thing for a cotton crop, cotton has a taproot. Cotton was able to tap down into that. So then we were able to make recommendations to the farmer, hey, you don't necessarily need to put as much nitrogen down on the top, because once that plant gets big enough and has a long enough taproot, it's getting more nitrogen down lower. So there's different needs or different ways you can take other samples this deeper if you want to. It depends on your situation. And most people in lawn or garden, top 6 inches would be most ideal. Of course, this is kind of just showing different, the soil or the land changes. And like in this situation, the person did 4 samples because it's all different. And in this one, this is what I was talking about. They went in and did multiple subsamples just kind of randomly. And they mixed all those together into one sample and sent it off. Here's what a soil test looks like when you get it back. They'll send it back to the lab in a kind of a graph. It's pretty easy to read. Here's it'll tell you your pH. Like this one's super high, 8.9. You tell them what you're growing. Maybe it's a lawn or trees or shrubs or whatever. They'll usually make a recommendation, but they'll put this fertilizer recommended over here based on what you tell them you're growing. They put it into a bar graph. You can see like the nitrates or the nitrogen is very low. This dashed line is a critical level. This would be the ideal for that plant that you turn in. And then nitrogen potassium is very low on this one. Now, of course, it has, higher calcium, magnesium, sulfur, but this person needs to put down, they're saying, 0.8 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, 3.1 of phosphorus, and 3.2 pounds of potassium per 1,000 square feet. So this person would try to find a fertilizer that best fits that right there. And we do have fertilizer calculators on their website that you can figure this, yes.
So if you buy a bag of each, how long do those bags last for, being good nutrients?
It's a good question. And I don't really know, an exact answer to it. My thoughts are probably if you saved it up, maybe this year, like you saved them for next year, you probably get something that's probably not going to be probably as strong, I guess. Over time, it'll lose its effectiveness.
But at least more than a year, probably?
Yeah, it lasts more than a year. I mean, especially if it's put up and it's kept in the bag. Didn't let it get wet. It wasn't exposed to the elements or anything. Yes.
Are you going to tell us how to do the sample or where to send it or how we can do that?
Yeah. So, I think Danielle, do you have the, she's got the soil samples. So, we have what we call kind of sample kits available here in our office. Free pickup. Anytime, if you want to come by our office that we're open, you can pick up these little soil sample bags that you put your sample in. It's real simple. It tells you here's a field line. You fill it with your soil. You fold it over, and then this is like a little twisty tie you turn at the top. And then there's a form here. And this form, basically, you just fill in your information. Top, your name, address, what kind of test you want ran. Yes, come in.
Did you mention dry soil?
Yeah, it needs to be very dry. You don't want to, sit on some wet soil. It's trying to get dry. Okay, good point, Danielle. Then you select down here what type of test you want to do, which most people just do a routine analysis, which tests for most all the nutrients, and you fill it in here. If you're doing multiple samples, you would list them here. It asks you what you're growing and whatnot. You got to put that in, and then on the back it has the address where you mail it to. So just take this to the post office, or get a little box in the mail, put a check in there, mail it off. Then they will email you your results. Usually about 10 to 14 days. Sometimes the labs will back up. This time of year, there's people from all over the state. There's homeowners, there's farmers, there's everybody sending them in this lab, and they get a little behind. I've seen them sometimes get like 3 weeks on getting your results back to you. But most times in the year, 10 to 14 days, you'll have some results
How
back.
soon do you need to send the sample as soon as you dig the sample? How soon because you said there was a timeline when you dig the sample, the 6 months?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm doing the fair saying, but you're not under like don't stress. I'm like, I dig it, it's got to go. I dig my sample, I set it aside, and then 2 or 3 days later, I get a chance to go to the post office, put it in the mail. I've done that before myself. When I've done something like in a field demonstration, I had to pull all these samples, and took them back to the office, and it was a few days where I was able to get them to the post office.
That's the only way to do soil samples, though, is to send them in. None of the garden supplies or anything test your soil.
Now, I don't know about the local garden supplies. Do y'all know if they do any soil testing or anything? I don't think they
They have
do.
kits, but.
I think she's talking about the kits you can buy that are
Okay.
iffy.
Yeah, there's some, maybe home type stuff like that. There are also other labs out there too. I want to take Salem is not the only lab, and I know of other people, or I say farmers and stuff that have sent theirs to use a lab like maybe in Oklahoma or Kansas or whatnot. Yes.
You definitely don't want to put any kind of fertilizer or anything on your lawn if you're doing like your yard test until after you get that soil test.
Yeah. And on the form, the point that was made was, don't put the fertilizer down and then go take a soil test. And on the form, it does ask, when was the last time you fertilized? And what did you put down? If you know. Like, well, I put a 12-5-10 fertilizer down on March 5th. So they want you to note that. Now, one thing I will say about sending to other labs, especially out-of-state labs, well, And you can, and there's people that do it. If it's in these folks know Texas, they know Texas soils and whatnot, and they better make better recommendations, I guess, than what somebody at some lab in Kansas may not really know what soil's like here. So, any other questions about soil testing?
How frequently do you recommend doing the soil test?
Well, that's a good question. So how often should you do a soil test? You know, ideally, probably once a year. Like right now, do a soil test, see what my soil looks like. If it's in a lawn situation, before I get started, you get you a baseline a knowledge of what's there when you start. Now, I will say that you can do a soil test in the fall, and then you can do one in the spring. And if you didn't apply anything, they can look different. A lot of times on nitrogen, because nitrogen is used up. So let's wrap up here real quick. The soil test, this of course calculate fertilizers. There's some calculators. And if you have questions about how to do that, you can certainly give me a call or come by or talk to the Master Gardeners. They can help you do that. There's a calculator on their website for soil testing. You can go to soiltesting.tanu.edu. You can put in the numbers, what the your soil test they recommended, you put it down, and it'll give you a fertilizer combination that would most accurately fit that. So there's some different tests on there. There's some for ag and some for lawn. But that's about it. So I hope at this point, I know I went a little over on time, but I hope your understanding of soil now is maybe better than what it was when you first walked in here today. And then next up, we're going to kind of go into talking about how to fix it, how to fix your soil, and depending on your situation. So, that means out. Turn it back over to Kathy. Thank you.